Welcome everyone to this week's Wednesday webinar. Today we're going to be talking about ways to connect to data in Power BI. So just a brief agenda, we're going to spend the majority of our time today within Power BI looking at the different connections that can be done. First, we're going to review the types of connections that are available because there's a lot of them. So we're going to take a look at those, and then we're going to do examples of connections with OData, the SQL Server, files, folders, websites, and entering data directly. These are some of the more common ways that customers I have worked with have connected and should give you a really good overview. Of course, we can't get into all of them because, as you will see, there are a ton of them out there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into looking at these connections. And here we go. So I've pulled up my Power BI desktop version, which this is available for free to download. So you can always start playing with this. And when you first are looking to enter data, there's this Get Data option up here on the toolbar. And if I select Get Data, there's some common data sources. And I'm going to go ahead and click More. And let's see if the box will pop up here. So here's where we can see all the different data sources that are available, and you can see there is quite a few. You can see there's Azure, there's Microsoft Exchange Online, SharePoint, Business Central. You can get to Microsoft's customer engagement, the CRM, Salesforce, Google Analytics. There's just so many different options for connecting. And with a lot of software systems as well, especially like GP, which is why we're going to be looking at that connection today, is anything that is SQL backed you can connect to as well, because you can go in through SQL servers. And with this too, all this automatically shows everything you can search if you're looking for something specific in here, or there are different filters just in general. If you want to look at file type, database type, you can filter to get to the particular type of connection that you want. So the first one that we're going to look at today is we're going to look at the OData connection. So an Odata Feed, and it's here, or you can get it through the all box, but I'm just going to select OData here. And the usual system that I connect to through OData is the Microsoft Dynamics 365 Customer Engagement, or CRM system. And I will show you where to get the OData link on that, just in case you guys have it. I know not everyone does have that, and you can get an OData link through GP as well, or other services. But today we are going to look specifically at CRM. So within your CRM, if you go to the advanced settings here, it pops up another tab, and we are going to go to customizations, and then we're going to go to the developer resources, and we are going to get our instance web API here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this link, and that's what I need from CRM, and I'm going to place this URL here for the OData feed. I'm going to go ahead and select OK. Now, whenever you're connecting to a data source, a lot of times it will ask you what credentials you want to use to connect to this data source. When I am connecting through an OData feed into a particular software system, I like to use the organizational account for credentials. And then I sign in. And since it's my Microsoft login, I'm already signed in. Okay, so I'm currently signed in, and I'm going to go ahead and select Connect here. And it's just going to take a moment to apply those credentials. So generally, I find software systems across the board, I usually use the organizational data. It's not that you can't use other credentials, but I just find that the security getting connected seems to run smoother, and I have less errors and problems if I use the organizational credentials when logging into something like that. So what we see now is this is connected into through that Odata feed, and these are all the different tables that are available within the CRM. So this is my sandbox CRM, and anytime you have expanded the tables, you can highlight a table and it will give you a preview over here on the right-hand side. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull in, say I want to pull in accounts. Within here, you can also search as well. So if you know a table's name, so for example, I want to find specific information about opportunities, I can start typing in opportunities and the different options will come up. And I will pull in both accounts and opportunities. Once you place a check mark, unless you uncheck it, it will keep that selection for you even as you move around through the search. Let's say I also want to pull in my leads. I'm going to select those three. You have a couple different options when you are initially connecting to your data. You can load it directly or you can transform the data. Transforming the data will pull you into the Power Query editor where you can apply a lot of different transformations to your tables, whether it's changing names, replacing values, or doing aesthetic changes, or even query changes. So for example, let me go ahead, and I'm not going to get too into it, but just to show you kind of how I would connect to data, I'm going to select transform data. If you select to load, it would just bring it directly into this report here. But this is what pops up if I transform data and then I'm in the Power Query editor. So one thing I could do if I wanted to look at opportunities, you know, I don't have a ton in here, but if I had a lot, I could look for like a particular date type column. So let's see if I want to say, I'm looking for like a created date here. And I've probably passed right by it, but we'll go with modified on. So I could select to filter at this point in time. And let's say I only want to see things that are within this year. I'm only concerned with opportunities from this year. So I'm going to go this year. The only reason to do something like this where you may want to transform it first is if you know you have a lot of changes you need to make, or if you want to do a filter such as created within this year. If you're looking at pulling in, you know, 5-10 years of data, if you've got a lot of rows of data, it can take a long time to load that data. So it may be worth transforming first so you can cut down on the amount of rows that you're going to import. It just makes it load a little quicker. So just kind of a side tip with connecting to data. I know we got a little into transformation there, but that is something that is worth thinking about when you are connecting to these raw tables. And raw tables are going to be, you know, with your Odata feeds and also with one of the ways we are going to connect to SQL data here. So let's go ahead. And from SQL data, there's two different ways to connect to SQL data. And you can do that by pulling up saved views or the raw tables that exist within your SQL server, or you can enter a SQL query directly. You can enter the script into a box for Power BI. So we're going to look at both ways here. And I'm going to select SQL Server here, this little box. And I'm going to go ahead, and this is the name of my demo server, and then my database. And there's two different data connectivity modes with SQL servers, import and direct query. Import will load and take a snapshot of all your data at a particular point in time whenever you do the import or the refresh. The direct query is that direct connection so that when you open your report, it will query it at that point in time. There are certain functions within Power BI that do not work with direct query, so that is always something to be careful of. And if you want to know more about that, we definitely can look at that. Usually I use import just because we are doing automatic refreshes, and I like keeping it kind of consistent and having all the different features available to me. So let's go ahead and select OK here. It's going to look similar to what we saw with the Odata Feed. When I am connecting to SQL servers, I do use Windows credentials. I do find that most of the time your SQL security settings are hooked to your Windows login, so I use that a lot. I'm going to go ahead and connect here. And it's going to give me a little pop-up just saying that it's encrypted, and it'll have to be unencrypted for us to be able to see the values, which we know. And it's going to look just the same as the Odata Feed did here. It's going to pop up, and here are all the different tables that I can select from. So if you have saved views within your SQL Server, they would be available here. Also, all the raw tables that we see for GP are in here as well. And the same caution as what I was talking about with the Odata, if you're connecting to raw tables within GP and you have a lot of data, it's definitely worth looking to transform the data first. But if you have some saved views, a lot of times those are already filtered down to what you might be looking for. So like with this, we can go ahead, let's say we wanted to see I happen to know there's sales transactions. Let's go ahead and pull that in. And the same thing, if you highlight it, a preview is going to pop up and you can select multiple tables. And this time I'm just going to select to load right away. And instead of popping up that Power Query editor, it's going to start spinning here, showing us that it is loading that. And then it will appear over here on the right-hand side with our other tables that we've pulled in. Okay. So that's doing a connection to the save views. Let's look at entering SQL script directly into Power BI, because you can do that as well. So I'm going to go ahead. I have a script here ready. When we select SQL Server, and the box pops up and we can enter, okay, here's our server. And if I go to advanced options, we can choose a timeout, which generally a report, what that means is how long is it going to spend trying to pull all the data in before it would time out. If you have millions of rows of data, you may want to set that to 30 or 60 minutes. Otherwise, usually the default, which runs about 15 to 20 minutes before it times out, is sufficient. But if you're having problems with your tables loading, definitely you could add in a higher number of minutes for timeout. But I'm just going to paste my SQL statement in here. One thing it does say is that it requires a database. So up here where I enter the server and database name, it does say database is optional. I like to enter the database just because it takes me right to the folder that I want. And if you are doing the actual SQL statement, it is required that you have that database entered. So I'm going to go ahead and select OK here. And this is going to give me a preview of the table that I am pulling in from that query. This is what my table is going to look like. And I can load or transform it from here as well. I'm just going to load this one because I made a pretty succinct SQL query for that. So I don't need to further filter it down. Now the next few that I want to look at, we're going to look at files, folders for adding data into Power BI. I find this to be used a lot with customers if you have reference data. So maybe an Excel file that takes, okay, here are all my sales territory numbers or whatever they may be, and here's the manager for that sales territory, and I want to be able to look at my report and filter by manager. name instead of sales territory. And so you could have a reference file for defining that out. You could have a reference file for if you have locations or warehouses, things like that, where maybe you have, HOU and then it's like Houston plant or something like that. So you can enter Excel files. I'm going to go ahead and select Excel here. And you also can do CSV text files as well, but a lot of times I use Excel files. So the one I have here is I'm just doing a webinar and blog post Excel file. And here's all the different tables that I have available. And I'm just going to say I want to see my tables that list out the different blog posts and the different webinars that I did and their dates. And I'm going to go ahead and load that data. So an Excel file is super easy to load. A lot of times I do use them as relationships and reference tables. But if you have other data in an Excel file, you certainly can bring that into Power BI as you update the file wherever it's located. So in this case, this one is on my desktop. If I update the Excel file in there, the next time my Power BI data is refreshed, those changes will be in there. So it can be nice. We don't like to use a lot of Excel, but it seems like we will never completely get away from it. So we definitely can use it in Power BI. You also can pull over folder data into Power BI. This is something I've also seen used. So I'm going to go to Get Data, and let's go ahead. I'm going to go to More. And on this one, I'm going to say I want to pull over a whole folder. So I'm going to connect to a folder, and then I get to browse the location of the folder. And this one I'm going to browse, and I'm going to pull over my whole blog post and webinar folder here. I'm going to go ahead and select OK. And what it's going to tell me, when you pull over a whole folder, what it's going to tell me is what is included in that folder, what type of documents. So you can see here, I have a template for blog post that's a .docx file, and then I have PowerPoint files, I have GoToMeeting files, I have an Excel file in here as well. So this is telling me what is within that particular file, and gives me some created dates, modified dates when I last accessed it, and a folder path. That's where it's at. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to load this. And this can be helpful. I've seen folders used if you are tracking input from colleagues. So say you are running a big production and it requires everyone to submit a file, or maybe there's a file for a bunch of different meetings that you're having for your sales retreat or something like that. You could have a folder brought in and you could constantly oversee, how many files have already been loaded in here? Do we have one for each of our meetings that we are having? Things like that. That's what I've seen folders used for. It's kind of just a way to make sure people are putting the data in there that you need. You're not looking directly at the file data, so you're not looking at the PowerPoint presentation, but you definitely can see that folder path. So if you wanted to go look at it, you can copy the folder path and pull that up. But it does help you to see what is all in that folder. Super helpful when you have shared folders. You also can do Sharepoint folders. So this does hook into Sharepoint, something you can hook up to Power BI as well. So if your company uses Sharepoint, those Sharepoint folders could be used in the same way as the folder that I just put in here. And you can see all my tables are accumulating over here on the right-hand side. This is something I always say to be a big benefit of Power BI is that you can have multiple different data sources on one report. So I could create an amazing report that has some CRM data, some GP data from SQL. Now I've got in some different reference data from an Excel file and folders file. The next thing I'm going to pull in is you can pull in actual website data. So if you want to hook up to a URL on the web, we can do that. So let's go ahead and say we want to hook up to the web. And I'm going to go ahead and say I want to pull in a news site. No judgment for news sites. I just picked one, random, no main reason or anything like that. We're going to do NBC News, and I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And for this, I just use anonymous access for this because there really isn't a security level. As long as you have website access, you can get to the URL, and it's going to show me the different tables that are available. And with this, with news sites or any website, you know, IMDb or weather.com, things like that, what I have seen this used for majority is if you want to keep kind of a pulse on maybe what the top 10 stories are of the day, or what is it particularly, what is the weather like in this particular area, so I can keep track of current weather or a 10-day forecast or something like that. So with this one, I'm going to go ahead and say, let's look at the different tables here. Okay. Well, I think this is, let's see, one of the tables that they have. We'll go ahead and load. But you could pull up, you know, this isn't getting into the actual stories that are on there. It's just telling you basic headlines. So you could see what are the headlines for today as the data is refreshed. So that's something that can be helpful if you need to know some current data that's out there. You can also hook up to Facebook or LinkedIn, things like that as well. I just chose a news site because it's pretty generic. And then the last thing that I want to show you guys today is entering data directly. This is not something I recommend a lot unless you really need some type of small reference table. And even then, a lot of times I will do it directly within the queries themselves. But if you do have something where maybe you have just 4 main locations and you want to have a different table that says, here's the 4 locations, here's how I want them identified, you know, you have a few columns of data, you can actually enter data directly into Power BI. And if I select enter data, it comes up allowing me to create the table. So if I wanted to say day of week, day in our system, maybe we have some sort of funny naming system or numbering system. Oops, I hit tab, so I accidentally inserted one extra column there. I'm just going to go down. Let's say I wanted to, I worked at a call center one time where our week started on Saturday instead of Sunday. So all of the normal conventions of the order of the week didn't make sense. And so like if you work Saturday and Sunday, you'd work until Friday, and then you could have the next Saturday, Sunday off. So maybe Saturday is the first day of the week in this case. So we want to give each of our days a value, so that we want to keep the day as it is within whatever table it comes over as, but we want to be able to order it in the way our weeks appear, with Saturday appearing first and Friday being the last day of the week. So we're just saying that Saturday is day 1 in this. Something like that. You don't have to enter a lot of data. It could be helpful. There are things you can do within transforming queries that could also achieve this, but this is just another feature that Power BI does have available. I have used it here and there with smaller reference tables. So let's just say we'll call this the week reference table, and I'll go ahead and load that. Once you have all of your connections within Power BI, you can edit them, update them, change them, and you can also access them again. So we've connected to a lot of different things. If I go here to recent sources, here are my most recent sources that I have connected to. You can see my SQL server, you can see the Excel file, the area that my folder came in, NBC News. In one I've done recently, I did weather.com. So you can see the different things that I've connected to. Another thing you can do is when we talked about the credentials types that we've used, so we connected with organizational data, or we connected with Windows credentials, Power BI, in being smart, does hold on to those credentials. So if I come in here again and I want to hit my SQL server again, it's not going to ask me what credentials I want to use again. It's just going to take me in to the tables. So if you want to change that, if you're having problems, if you're receiving errors, like it's not accepting your organizational account or your Windows credentials and you want to go in and change it, you can also manage your data connections. With transform data, be careful not to select the button because that'll open the Power Query Editor, but you can hit this little drop-down arrow and go to data source settings. And this is going to show you all your data source settings, and you can get in and edit your permissions. So here where I connected to my SQL Server, if I selected that and I wanted to go to edit permissions, see, I connected with a Windows permission, I can select edit and it would allow me to go in and say, maybe I want to use the database credentials or the Microsoft account, and I could change that so I stop receiving that error. I can also change the source. So if my SQL Server is upgraded and it is no longer named desktop dash all this random stuff, I could come in here and change the source and just type in the new server name. I don't have to go in and redo all my queries or reconnect to the data. I can make those small changes very easily in here. So I know that was a lot of technical data to throw at you guys in a short period of time, but I hope that did give you some ideas on how you can start getting connected into Power BI data. One thing, just if you have any questions, well, it's popped up this way. Sorry, I had that on my wrong slide there. But if you have any questions, here is my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me via email or phone, or you can connect with our company as a whole via our website, or we do have a support email address as well. Does anyone have any questions right now? Awesome. Well, I thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time with me today. I hope you learned some new things and are excited to try out Power BI, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.